My girlfriend and I went camping 5 hours away from home for her birthday and our anniversary, which were on the same day. We made the trip the day after a big storm had passed through. We left town early and arrived there in the early afternoon. There was a man at the entrance who told us that no one else was going to be there for the weekend. This news made us happy as we were looking forward to more privacy. First, we drove down long pathways to our designated area. As we got closer to it, the road narrowed. Basically, you had to back out to exit. We unloaded the car, set up the tent, and decided to walk around the woods. It was eerily silent. Since it was still bright out, we absorbed as much nature as we could and walked a few miles away. We reached a point in the woods where there were some odd-looking white cabins. They were all built in the exact same way and there was no sign of life. It felt as though we shouldn't be there, so we turned around and walked back. We took a breather in the tent, then tried to start a fire in the fire pit. Unfortunately, neither of us had ever been camping before and had no idea how to start a fire. We had bought some self-lighting logs from Walmart and some lighter fluid, but everything else around us was thoroughly soaked from the rain that had passed through the day before. We knew we needed kindling of some sort, but dry sticks or leaves were scarce. Anyway, we somehow managed to build a fire. Then out of the blue we heard mumbling. It was low, indistinct mumbling. We couldn't make out words, but it didn't sound like a noise an animal could make. It sounded like hushed and unclear words. We sat in silence and the mumbling grew louder, as did the footsteps, until it sounded like it was right outside our tent. We both froze. I don't think either of us was breathing. My girlfriend then said, "We have to get to your car." So I peeked out of the tent into the darkness and told her to stay behind me. Then we ran to the car. I locked the doors while my girlfriend was in full panic mode. I kept looking around for any signs of life, but we seemed to be alone. I looked at her and said, "I'm going to grab our stuff. You stay in the car." We only had our ice chest and our tent outside. I hopped out, ran, grabbed our ice chest and tossed it into the back seat. As I turned to retrieve the tent, I began hearing footsteps closing in again. In a moment of pure terror, I yanked the tent out of the ground, wrapped the tarp around it, slung it over my shoulder like some panicked Santa Claus and shoved it into the trunk. When I got in the car, the only thing I said was, "Do we have everything in here?" My girlfriend said yes, and I floored it in reverse out of our camping area. Then we came to a fork in the road that branched into 6 different directions. I asked my girlfriend if she remembered which path we had taken to get in here, and she said she didn't know. We chose a random one and ended up in a different camping spot. I cursed under my breath and put the car in reverse again. Then, from the angle we had exited from, I noticed the main path back to the gate. As we hurried out of there, I spotted a single small green light in the woods to our right near where our designated spot had been. We drove the entire 5 hours back to our hometown and fell asleep on my girlfriend's parents' couch around 4 a.m. We never spoke of the trip again, and since then I've had no desire to camp.
When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years old, my family used to camp at a state park. Every night, my friend and I would walk through the woods in what we called the ritual. One particular night, we decided to venture further into the woods than usual. This eventually proved to be an ill-advised decision. We carried flashlights, but we liked to challenge ourselves to navigate through the woods with them turned off. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite when we heard soft whispering behind us. Naturally, we turned the flashlights on and spun around but saw nothing. Undeterred, we continued walking until we heard the whispering again. This time we paused and looked around a bit before deciding to head back to our campsite. Then we saw the source of the whispering. The sight of it made us scream and still gives me shivers to this day. The memory refuses to leave my mind and sometimes induces nightmares. There was a woman crawling on the ground, whispering random words. She was dressed in dark clothes and covered in dirt. It looked as if she were possessed by a demon and would kill us the second she noticed we were aware of her presence. When she saw that we had noticed her, she stood up and claimed she was looking for her campsite. She asked us for help with the most chilling look on her face. Foolishly, I agreed to help her, even while my friend was whispering in my ear that the entire situation was too peculiar. She walked ahead of us while my friend and I followed her, clutching each other for dear life. Every few steps, she would stop, take a deep breath, look back at us, and smile. There was something devilish in that smile that made me question my decision to help her. Nonetheless, This continued for a while. We wandered around until we eventually found her campsite. However, it was not an average campsite with fire or lights. The site was pitch black, and the only sound was that of people. Although I couldn't decipher what they were saying. It turned out that she and all her friends were quite drunk and behaving in a strange manner. It seemed as if they were involved in something profoundly eerie. My friend and I ran out of there as fast as we could. Just recalling that incident gives me the creeps.
I was camping in the Florida Keys near a quarry and an old dump site with several of my friends. One day, an oddly looking man with an untrimmed beard and a peculiar body structure approached our camp. He told us we needed to move further from the dump site because he planned on cleaning up the debris and burning some of the refuse in the area. We eventually obliged and moved. That night, the man started the burn, and we didn't give it much thought as we resumed our activities. However, our peaceful camping trip took a grim turn that night. We awoke to the sound of scratching outside our tent. To our horror, we found our tent covered in hundreds of rats. Chaos and panic ensued, especially since these rats were the size of rabbits, an unsightly spectacle by any standards. We managed to shake off as many as we could before escaping the tent. With the rats gone, it felt far too terrifying to return to sleep. Instead, we started a fire and stayed awake for the remainder of the night, fearful of another rat onslaught. The following night, we hesitantly fell asleep, assuming it would be safe because the man had completed his burning. Deep into the night, the terror resumed. We rushed out of our tents to escape the returning rat horde. Intriguingly, many of the rats were covered in blood, which, from our observation, didn't appear to be their own. This detail was noticed by one of my friends. At that point, we had two choices: either investigate the alarming phenomenon or pack our things and flee from the unnerving place. We chose the latter, packing up and heading for the highway. As we walked along the road, we encountered numerous police vehicles and an ambulance, an ominous sight. The police questioned us about our origin and whether we had noticed any other people in the vicinity. When we asked the officers about the situation, their response sent chills down our spines. Apparently, a man posing as a cleaner was, in fact, a serial killer. He kidnapped people, took them to the dump site, and burned their bodies under the guise of disposing of junk. Some of his victims were either incinerated or their remains were consumed by rats. My friends and I exchanged horrified glances and, without uttering a word to the officer, fled the scene. To this day, none of us discussed the incident, and we certainly have no plans to go camping anytime soon.